you have bi-coastal children now in these presumed joint custody arrangements where they'll live 6 months of the year on the East Coast and 6 months of the year on the West Coast. And during the 6 months that they're on the other side, the other parent can fly over there. That's not practical. I don't know too many guys that can afford frequent flyer miles like that to travel back and forth to see their kids.
Right.
So in a presumptive joint custody, as Sal said, the kids cannot be displaced. I agree with that. The children have to stay in the same school district, have the same friends, have the same doctors, and not be displaced. It's
but that all is a part of the discretion of the court. I mean, I agree that in most cases, I just want to make that clear. What you're saying, in most cases, that's what it really should, what the court would be looking at. It doesn't mean that you couldn't have some extreme situations that the parents and the kids are quite happy with.
Right.
Which is why we hire law guardians to represent the children and look through the children's eyes on behalf of the court.
Yeah, but they are a total fraud, in my opinion. I don't know about what you think.
Well, I mean, there are good law guardians and bad law guardians, and I even do some law guardian work. But you've got to have, I mean, it's like in any other profession. You have good law guardians and bad law guardians. But law guardians are a necessary evil in the system because someone has to look out for the children, and pretty much they should be the most objective voice in the court. Not all the time, but they should be.
Yeah, well, but the problem is, and the conflict comes up, as long as we brought this up, I got to ask a lawyer here because, the conflict comes up is when the lawyer, what does the lawyer pay attention to? His own best judgment as to, what the kids, let's say they're 7 and 8 years old or 7 and 9 years old, what they really should be wanting, or does he go directly to them and say, hey, little Joe, who do you like? What do and it may be totally against that child's interest. So how does a law guardian react?
See, that's an interesting point. We get asked all the time, why can't my kids come in and talk? And you say the purpose of the law guardian is to represent the children.
Right.
But in many cases, you're right. A 1.5 and a 3-year-old kid are not going to be able to articulate who they want to live with.
Yeah,
and a law guardian has to come out of the genie hat and figure out.
And let me tell you, there are law guardians who don't understand and argue amongst themselves what their real job is. Because one of the problems they have is they're supposed to be representing the best interest of the child. Well, depending on the age of that child and other circumstances, they may not want to do what that child is going to want to do. You have a 16-year-old child who's living with mom because she's supplying him with marijuana. Well, maybe you don't want him living with mom, so maybe we're going to make a change, even though the child certainly wants to live there. And so they have a very difficult...
Dad has a structured household and mom's very liberal. Who am I going to live with? I'll live with mom. She'll let me stay up late and use a cell phone and chat on the internet.
And this joint custody issue is not new. I mean, here's a book from 1976, The Disposable Parent, that'll hold up. The Case for Joint Custody. 1976, they were writing books about it. So it's been around for quite a while. And it's certainly an interesting issue.
That brings up a whole other set of issues. Why hasn't something been done with it? I mean, it did get up to the governor, what was it, in
87.
No, it wasn't 87. It was much earlier than that. I know that. It was under Hugh Carey, whenever it was 1984, and he vetoed it. It's never gotten to a governor since that time. So it's been around a long time. I think it had a certain apogee somewhere around the early 80s, and then just, has been suffering, particularly in this state, under the combined onslaught of so-called women's groups, actually National Organization for Women, and the Bar Association, who basically sees this as a way of taking money out of their pockets.
Well, if you're right, because there was a famous cartoon when Michael Jordan announced that he was getting divorced. Then there was a subsequent cartoon that said that we've decided that we're going to reconcile, and in the background was 100 lawyers dropping dead because, like, there went their cash cow there. If there could be a way to presume joint custody, would it not be better for the children insofar as affirming that the child will in fact see the parents? Joint custody, there would be no parental alienation. There would be no dispute over seeing the children. There would be no need to enforce a visitation order.
But let's also make sure that we understand there's also a great deal of difficulties with the joint custody arrangement as well. You have a child being kind of a traveling salesman running back and forth between two parents, often setting up two homes. If they can financially afford that, that's a good thing, but sometimes people can't do that. Right. And you really are now making both those parents live very close to each other. If it's not, the proximity of the two parents is not close, it's just not going to work. And you've said that before, you can't have intercoastal, you can't even have inter-county. If we're talking about a 2 or 3 hour difference in the amount of time it takes me to get from one household to the other, that's going to cause problems. So there are some disadvantages to it. Too.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I know schooling is an important thing, often a big thing that causes the litigation to go on. But you can divide up the year, kind of interestingly enough, if you take all the vacation days or most of the major vacation days during the summer and so on, you can almost get a 50-50 split out of that. It's not quite, but you can get pretty darn close to it, where a kid really doesn't have to be moving back and forth every day or every week. So the parents can live a bit further away. The point I'm trying to make is we don't have to be really so totally restrictive in this when we consider the presumption of joint custody. That should not ride on whether we're going to only consider those situations where they're within 3 blocks of one another or 100 miles of one another. Those kinds of things could be worked out by the court. We leave the court to use its discretion, hopefully with the help of other professionals and so on, to make those decisions. But the presumption of joint custody should not ride on these kinds of speculations. That's all I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Right. There's another book. You talk about this issue being long and hard. Caught in the Middle, Protecting the Children of High Conflict Divorces. And I just wanted to read a passage here that speaks specifically to custody. And it says, current research clearly indicates that joint legal custody alone does not assure children a reduction in conflict.
Yeah.
So just because the parents are sharing the children doesn't mean that the acrimony doesn't exist. And I think that where a judge, like as in this decision, said that the parents shall have joint custody, then that's like forcing them to be nice to each other. Mm-hmm. So if they're not nice to each other, then what's next? Where do you go now? Where's your relief? Who's the mediator? Are you back in court?
How's it going to work?
How's it going to work?
Yeah, well, first of all, you have to start out with a decently drafted order that's very specific. Some research has been done on that. And when you have sloppy orders where there's a lot of, gaps in the timing and what have you, then you're bound to have trouble, particularly when there's a high conflict situation. But it's also been shown that when the order is drafted very explicitly as to when the trade-off is going to be, the trade-off of the children is going to occur, what the time, what the days are, including holidays, how that's going to be affected if that's an issue. When these orders are that explicit, it then gives a blueprint for the parents to work with. If you give them, especially in a high conflict situation, if you give them any leeway, they're going to exploit it. They're going to immediately run into that, into that back.
But can't you just about exploit any kind of contract? I mean,
yes, but it's more difficult when it's explicit. Otherwise,
you can. But one of the other issues with this is if in the joint custody situations, the history in other states has been that they are much more durable than the normal run-of-the-mill that we see here. 75% of child support is paid on time in joint custody situations, only about 42% in non.
Right.
So we're seeing where when you have that kind of a situation, I guess most people, it would make me think anyway, most of both parents feel like they're involved enough so that they want to comply with the entire order, and it makes the order that much more strong.
Or the order has to have an or else clause. Or else, if either parent disparages the other or doesn't abide by the tenets of the order, then the aggrieved parent can then seek for sole custody.
And we're seeing more and more of that with the parental alienation syndrome, where actually custody has been taken away from one parent because they violated that type of
that's going to be another show one day.
Right, I was going to bring that up.
Because that's another issue that doesn't exist on the books.
Starting trouble.
Yeah.
What, child alienation?
Parental alienation does not exist on the books. That's right.
That's true.
That was going to be my next question. Wouldn't shared parenting stop the alienation that's going on?
You would hope that it would. If it doesn't, then it's not going to work. So, will it stop it, or will parental alienation stop because of it, or will the reverse happen? I'm not sure which is which. But I think we've seen in most of the other states, and all the studies I've certainly seen, is that it's been very successful. And it has stopped a lot of that because you're given equal access to the child, and we can be doing this back and forth. And I think it forces parents to start looking at the children and saying, what am I doing to them? Because if we don't do that, if I'm just mad at her and she's mad at me, we're going to be fighting each other forever. But if we're looking at the children, we're more likely to say, you know what, we're harming them by not doing the right thing.
Right. We've had studies with older children who have had shared parenting or joint custody orders, and they statistically